There is an ancient Zen story, and you've almost certainly heard at least one variation on it at some point. Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer whose horse ran away. All the neighbors came around that evening and said, "That's too bad." But the farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back and brought 7 wild horses with it. And all the neighbors came around and said, "That's great, isn't it?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." And the next day, his son was attempting to tame one of the horses. And as he was trying to ride it, he was thrown, breaking his leg. And all the neighbors said, "Well, that's too bad, isn't it?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." The next day, military recruiters came around looking for people to draft for the army. And they rejected the son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came around and said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And the farmer said, maybe. Now, like many Zen stories, this one doesn't really have an ending. And that's because the story represents life. And as Robert Frost said, in 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. Life never ends. So the story never ends. And every episode of this thing called life is ours to claim as good or bad. Very often, our good comes about in totally unexpected ways. Oscar Wilde coined a phrase when he wrote, "What seems to us as bitter trials are often blessings in disguise." And to which an anonymous wit added, "Experience will teach you that some blessings are unbelievably well disguised." Well, how do you respond to misfortune? For most people, the first response is to complain about their bad luck. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Is this my karma coming back to bite me? Often, however, with the passage of time, we can look back upon that supposed tragedy and see it in a new perspective. It's like cracking open a drab stone to reveal a dazzling diamond. And we can see that that disaster was a blessing in disguise. The event wasn't the calamity we thought it was, but rather an opening to something new and better. The South African philosopher Mohokoma said, "Some of the best things that have ever happened to us wouldn't have happened to us if it weren't for some of the worst things that have ever happened to us." Now, it may be easy to see blessings in disguise in retrospect. We have the advantage of 2020 hindsight. But what happens if we start training ourselves to look right now for the blessings in disguise? We shift our outlook. We start living our lives differently. And this transformation has several stages, each one building on and leading to the next. Here are just 5 things that happen when we learn to look for the blessings in disguise right here and right now. First, you stop making snap judgments. Now, it's not easy to stay happy and joyful in the face of loss or pain. Life often asks us to endure enormous change, change that we don't always welcome. And our reaction that this is bad often turns out to be an overreaction. But when we practice looking for blessings in disguise, we learn that our initial snap judgments are frequently wrong. The truth is that we cannot now fully appreciate the role that any given event will play in our lives. When we can see events from a different angle, our perspective shifts, which is why countless people have gone through a difficult divorce or lost a job, only to say later that it was the best thing that ever happened to them. By looking back and counting our blessings in disguise, We stop seeing ourselves as victims. Be aware that you can't see the full picture just yet. The next time something bad happens to you, just pause and say to yourself, maybe. It might be a bad thing or it might be a good thing. As the saying goes, time will tell. Secondly, you learn the power of your words. Finding the blessing in disguise demonstrates the power of language to shape our perceptions. When we label a situation as bad, we're usually reacting to how that experience makes us feel. And when we relabel the event as a blessing in disguise, we use the power of our words to change how we see that event. We can use that power at any time, even before we experience the blessing. When we endure some painful event or a setback, we may conclude that life is cruel and unfair. Unfortunately, by affirming that, we set ourselves up to experience more of the same. If our expectation is that we live in a cruel world, life will confirm that for us. So when a negative belief starts to rear its ugly head, reframe it in a positive way. Instead of saying, life is cruel, try, life is showing me just how strong I am. And let go of words like bad and instead say challenges or lessons. Just by using different words, we can take some of the sting out of a difficult situation. The third thing that happens when we learn to look for the blessings is that we learn positive lessons about life. Very few things are truly a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. And the blessing in a blessing in disguise is often a lesson about life and how to respond to it. Through loss, change, or grief, we may gain insight into our character. We may learn that we are more capable and courageous than we thought. And we may get to reevaluate the appropriateness of our actions and reactions. Karma can be a cruel teacher, but it is a teacher nonetheless. Looking for blessings in disguise allows us to reframe seemingly awful events so that we can identify the lessons. And when we view these situations as teachers, we begin to see the way forward through the situation. The moment we look for the lesson, the situation begins to resolve itself. So the next time something happens to you that seems unfair, take a moment, pause, and ask yourself, what is life trying to teach me? As you develop a sense of what that lesson might be, you can reframe the entire episode as part of a larger story of your spiritual evolution. So keep that question top of mind. What is life trying to teach me? It can help you prevent a more drastic lesson later. It's been said that life tries to get our attention by tickling us with a feather. And if we don't get the message, life wraps our knuckles with a ruler. And if that doesn't get our attention, life whacks us upside the head with a 2x4. Pay attention. Life's lessons are only as dramatic as they need to be to enlighten us. Tragic events often teach us to be grateful for our lives. Far too often, we take life for granted, ignoring how magical and yet how fragile it can be. Finding the blessings in disguise develops our capacity for gratitude. And as we cultivate gratitude for our past experiences by seeing the blessings in them, we develop a new skill. We learn to react to new events with greater calm and balance. Knowing that the lesson will emerge allows us to cope with our current situation with greater ease. A powerful tool is to keep a journal of difficult events that turned out to have positive impacts for you. Your own list of blessings in disguise. Keep this list in mind the next time something occurs in your life. It can help you keep your balance in the face of new challenges you're experiencing. The fourth thing that happens when we learn to look for the blessings is that you tend to take responsibility for your life. The painful response to seemingly negative events often positions us as victims. Why did this happen to me? And you see this outside event as an attack on you. But when you reframe it as a blessing in disguise, you are learning the important lesson that you, and only you, are responsible for how you meet life. Now, taking responsibility does not mean that you run around trying to fix everyone or that everything is your fault. It's not about the blame game. However, you and you alone are responsible for how you respond to a situation, particularly your emotional response. Do you fall into a pit of despair, blaming the world, angry at God and everyone else? Or do you face it, accept it as it is without judging it, rename it a challenge, and look for the deeper lesson? And as part of that response, you may also need to take responsibility in the more traditional sense. That is, if your actions contributed to the situation, do what you can to help fix it. It can be painful to admit that you're part of the cause, but once you take steps to remedy the situation, you'll find that your own effort to take responsibility affirms your ability to meet any situation with integrity. The situation offers you the opportunity to recognize your own power. And fifth, you start to realize that your entire life, all of it, is a blessing. Everything that happens in our lives is the raw material for our highest good. Remember the biblical admonition: all things work together for good to those who love God. What that means is that when we're living in a conscious connection to spirit, no matter what happens, good is there in potential. Vance Havner summed up this idea beautifully when he wrote, God uses broken things. It takes broken soil to produce a crop, broken clouds to give rain, broken grain to give bread, and broken bread to give strength. Looking at life from that perspective, maybe no blessing is truly disguised. Maybe the disguise is just the creation of our own mind, whose limited perspective sees negativity where there is none and reacts in fear. The fear blinds us to the fact that our personal growth and evolution sometimes requires that we undergo change, including sometimes change in the form of struggle or loss. But the blessings are there all along. It's our own fear that has hidden them. If the science fiction fantasy of time travel were ever to become a reality, there are certain historical figures I would like to meet. And near the top of my list would be Thomas Edison. Edison, of course, invented the incandescent light bulb, the microphone, the storage battery, talking movies, and over 1,000 other things. And his factory in New Jersey was a beehive of research and innovation. One night in December 1914, fire broke out in the film room. And within minutes, all of the chemical materials, the compounds, the celluloid for records and film, and other flammable things were going up in smoke. Fire companies from 8 surrounding towns arrived. but the heat was so intense that the water pressure was so low that the attempt to douse the flames was futile and everything was destroyed. The damage exceeded $2 million in 1914. That would be $63 million today. But the buildings were only insured for $238,000 because they were made of concrete and therefore said to be fireproof. With all his assets having gone up in smoke, would Edison's spirit be broken? He was 67 years old, past the retirement age for most. In the middle of all this, the inventor's son, Charles, searched frantically for his father. And he finally found him, calmly watching the fire, his face glowing in the flame's reflections, his white hair blowing in the wind. Charles said, "My heart ached for him. He was no longer a young man, and everything he had worked for was going up in flames. When he saw me, he shouted, 'Where's your mother?' And when I told him I didn't know, he said, 'Find her, bring her here. She will never see anything like this as long as she lives.'" The next morning, Edison looked at the smoldering ruins and said, "There is great value in disaster. All our mistakes are burned up. Thank God we can start anew." 3 weeks after that disastrous fire, Edison gave the world the first phonograph. Edison looked at the charred ruins and saw potential rising like the proverbial phoenix. Well, how do we learn to see beyond the disguise? Well, here are 4 steps that might interest you. First, appreciate that it could have been worse. Now, I've never been thrilled with that one. Oh, it could be worse. But it's true. However bad a circumstance seems, it could have been worse, much worse. Did you lose a loved one in an auto accident? There are people who've lost their entire families in a crash, and they manage to pick themselves up and go on with life. Are you facing a health challenge? There are plenty of people with far worse health problems who dealt with it and survived. Thinking about their stories can help you deal with yours. Second, trust that everything has the potential for good. Again, all things work together for good for those who love God. One of our New Thought pioneers, Emma Curtis Hopkins, had a somewhat more aggressive version of this idea. When confronted with a difficulty, she would affirm, "This too is good. This too is God, and I demand to see the blessing in it." Or, as the great philosopher Anonymous put it, "Sometimes good things fall apart so better things can fall together." And third, have faith in blessings in disguise. If you find yourself stuck in traffic, instead of fuming about it, realize that being stuck here may have saved you from being in a collision there. Having your flight canceled may bring you closer to something better. I know a man who met the love of his life during a canceled flight layover in an airport. Even if no great event comes from one of these types of situations, you may at the very least have learned something from them. And then, fourth, share your experience with others. Your story may be so helpful to someone who's dealing with life's difficulties. And if you do learn how a particular problem gifted you with a blessing, share that story with everyone you know so that they can benefit too. The more we openly express how fortunate we are, the happier and more content we will be. and happiness is contagious. Well, about now, you may be wondering, couldn't we skip the problem and get right to the benefit? Why doesn't Spirit give us blessings disguised as blessings? Well, maybe it's so we'll do a little digging to uncover the true riches of life. One of Napoleon Hill's most famous sayings was, every adversity, every failure, every heartache carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. It's very true, but it's up to us to plant that seed and nurture it to fruition. I began this talk with the story of the Chinese farmer. He refused to see any given circumstance as either good or bad. That ancient Zen concept has inspired many variations, from a novelty song in the 50s called That's Good, No That's Bad by Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs, to a sketch on the Hee Haw TV show and who knows what else. But here's a real life version of that from a woman who writes a blog called The Plain Spoken Pen. It's nothing dramatic, just everyday life, interpreted through a deliberately positive lens. She writes, sometimes you think life is handing you something bad, but God can work all things for our good. So back in February, I had a wreck in which my car was totaled. Oh, that's bad. No, that's good. The boys and I walked away unhurt. I got another car, and I ended up with a lower car payment and lower car insurance payment, and we have a larger vehicle that gets us from point A to point B, and Brian says it has a better sound system than the old car did. Then, in April, we found ourselves in the thoroughly unenviable position of having a house we could no longer afford. We walked away, and the bank took it back. And before we did that, we had to find someplace to live. Seemed like a tall order, since we wanted to keep the boys in their schools, and rent here is exorbitant. Oh, that's bad. No, that's good. We found a place to live in our school district, 3-bedroom and 2-bath, with just about everything we wanted for a price we could afford. The place we found, it's a trailer. Oh, that's bad. No, that's good. There's nothing wrong with it. It's sound. It's a roof over our heads with covered parking for our vehicles. We have a lovely yard, much nicer than we had at our previous house. It's out in the country, and most of our stuff fits in it. And we had a bunch of stuff that needed a good throwing away anyhow. Our landlords are lovely people, and if something breaks, I just pick up the phone and call. Living here is our opportunity to finally get back on solid financial footing. Life has happened, and this is our place to regroup. But we couldn't have our cats here. They had to be rehomed. It was not a decision we made lightly, and a whole lot of tears were shed. Oh, that's bad. No, that's good. Well, not as bad as it could have been anyway. A lovely woman gave them a happy home. Bless her, she already had 7 cats and took ours in to be her 8th and 9th. By all accounts, they are happy there, and she has everything set up really nicely if you're a cat. And while I miss the cats, I do not miss the cat hair or the litter box. Just when you thought things might settle down, wait, there's more. On Friday, I was laid off. It was for financial reasons, as our firm wasn't bringing in the work or the money to need 2 attorneys. That was really, really not how I expected my Friday to go. Oh, that's bad. Well, yeah, it would seem that way, wouldn't it? And I certainly wouldn't have gotten up Friday morning and said, let me see, I think I'd like to lose my job today. And had the choice been mine to make, I don't suppose I would have gone there. But when I look back at all the times things have happened, when our first response has been, oh, that's bad, and see that every single time God has brought something good out of it, I can't really get too worked up. This turn of events may have been a surprise to me, but it was absolutely not a surprise to God. There was a reason why I got that job, and there's a reason why I no longer have it. So right now, I'm okay. I'm breathing. I've already applied for 2 state jobs and reached out to friends to ask for a heads up if they hear of anything. And it is only the grace and peace of the Lord that keeps me grounded in the middle of this particular storm. Day by day, I'm learning what it means to pray without ceasing. And even in this, I can lift my eyes to God and give thanks. You got to figure that not too much is going to panic this woman. Notice how her past experiences with blessings in disguise have conditioned her to believe that any future calamities will come with benefits as well. She's figured out how to see past the disguise to the blessing. And how does she do that? She looks to the light. Disguises are very hard to penetrate in the dark. But in the light, we can see them as the shams they are. And the only truly effective disguises are those that you don't recognize as being disguises. Once you know you're looking at a disguise, it loses its power to fool you. As we said last week, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. Longfellow wrote that into each life rain must fall. And whether that's a curse or a blessing is a matter of opinion. If you had a garden wedding scheduled and thunderstorms moved in, that's a bit of a disaster. But if you're a farmer with fields that are dry and scorched, it's a blessing. But even in the worst rains, we know that the sun is still shining. And if you want the rainbow, you'll have to endure some rain. And even when the clouds are blackest, we know that a blessing is waiting to be discovered. But if we can't see the blessing, it's because we haven't looked for it. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Recognize what is before your eyes, and what is hidden will be revealed to you." As I was doing research for this talk, I ran across a song by a woman named Laura Story. It's just called Blessings, and it includes this bit of lyric. We pray for blessings. We pray for peace, comfort for family, protection while we sleep. We pray for healing, for prosperity. We pray for God's mighty hand to ease our suffering. And all the while, God hears each spoken need, and love is way too much to give us lesser things. What if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know God's near? And what if the trials of this life are mercies in disguise? What if the trials of this life, the rain, the storms, the hardest night, are mercies in disguise? So with Emma Curtis Hopkins, we can say, this too is good, this too is God, and I demand to see the blessing in it. But don't just demand to see the blessing, make a real effort to see it. See the disguise for the false face that it is. Rip off the mask and see the God potential. See the opportunity. See the blessing that is always there, waiting for you. And so it is. Thank you very much. It's time now for us to engage in the